Welcome to the Zen of Reffing Roller Derby, Lesson 17, Introduction to Penalties. I'm Axis Estival, the author of this training manual. I'm filming this on June 1st, 2018. The content of this presentation is up to date as of this recording. Should the video become outdated or replaced by a newer version, I'll put a link on the screen to where you can find more information. As always, you can find the latest version of the full training manual at www.tinyurl.com/zenreffing. A quick disclaimer: the WFTDA, MRDA, and JRDA are not responsible for the content of either my training manual or this presentation, nor do they make any claims as to the accuracy of their content. Another note: if you spot any errors or outdated information in this presentation, please put a comment on YouTube explaining the issue and listing the timecode. Lesson 17, Introduction to Penalties. Alright. Today is going to be an easy lesson for you, which is good after a very complicated lesson on scoring. So let's start by talking about some concepts here about penalties. First, what are penalties? Well, they're a punishment in the game, basically a little handicap that we give a team, because they committed an infraction related to illegally gained advantage for either the individual who performed the penalty or for their team, for disrupting game flow, that is the natural progression of the game, for risking the safety of oneself or others, or for unsporting conduct. There are three requirements necessary to issue a penalty. Number one, the initiator. Who initiated the action? Number two, the nature of the contact. What was the status of the skaters involved? Were they down? Was this between jams? Were they entering the penalty box? Were they on the track? Were they upright? What was the status? What were the parts of the skaters' bodies involved? Was this a forearm that went into somebody? Was this shoulder-to-shoulder contact? Did somebody's head get hit? And did the act appear intentional? All of those things go into basically establishing the nature of the contact. I mean, we know who did it because of the last thing. Now we want to know what happened. When we think of a penalty, we usually think in terms of physical contact, or at least attempted physical contact. But this could also include things like the nature of the infraction, or the nature of the action was a skater on the bench was yelling obscenities at the opposing team. So, it's usually physical, but it doesn't have to be. Third, we denote the impact. What was the result from the action? So again, initiator, nature, impact. And by the way, these are my words using on this. Initiator and impact, you'll hear everybody, most all referees agree on those two. Nature, some people will use some different terminology involved. On the subject of the initiator comes a third concept. The initiator of a block is always responsible for the legality of the contact. So, even if the initiator doesn't intend to make contact, they are responsible for it. Now, there is one exception to this, one notable exception, is when the contact was caused by an opponent's illegal action. Let me explain. You've got jammer A, or let's say skater A, we'll say black blocker. Okay, so black blocker 1 is coming in into the pack, and black blocker 1 goes and illegally forearms white blocker 1. This was an illegal action with their forearm. They pushed white blocker 1 to the side. White blocker stumbles because of this, because they're pushed aside, and they are forced into contacting black blocker 2. So black blocker 1 forearms white blocker 1. White blocker 1 stumbles and hits the back on back blocker 2, causing back blocker 2 to fall over. Now, normally you might say, well, white blocker 1 hit the back of black blocker 2, knocked him over, that is clearly a back block. But they would not have done this except that their action was caused by an opponent's illegal, in this case, forearm block. Therefore, it is going to be no penalty on white blocker 2 for blocking black blocker 2 in the back. This is almost like a tongue twister here. But we're going to look at each of the two actions separately. The forearm caused the white blocker to stumble. Based on the information I'm giving you so far, that is not a penalty. White blocker 2 hit the black blocker 2 in the back, but because it was caused by an illegal action, White blocker is not responsible for the legality of this content. Or not responsible for the action. Thus, we're not going to issue a penalty to white blocker 2 for a back block. Another thing about the initiator, it isn't always obvious who the initiator of a block is. Take this picture, for example. Car with a tree stuck in the grill. So the question is this: did the car strike the tree, or did the tree strike the car? Now you're saying, well, a tree can't move, so obviously it didn't strike the car. But that's the thing in roller derby. The skaters can move, so it does get a little bit tricky. I mean, maybe that tree was like Groot from the Guardians of the Galaxy, and it actually jumped in front of that car, and the poor drunk driver could not possibly have avoided it. Well, this happens in roller derby. So a skater is skating along, and if they go, and they just whack somebody in the back and knock them over, well, that's a penalty on the initiator. But what happens when that skater's moving on? They're trying to avoid the person with the back, trying to avoid the person in front of them, and that person moves, sidesteps at the last possible moment, gets in their way, and they can't possibly avoid them, and they just stick their back right in their way. Well, now the person in front is the initiator, so they are initiating a block with their back. That is a legal block you can initiate. You can do that, and didn't go so well for them. The skater got hit in the back and went flying. But that's because they presented that at the last possible moment. Another example, if I'm coming in and I'm going to issue a legal shoulder block on a blocker, but then at the last possible second, right before I get there, the skater just turns in place and they present their back. And now instead of hitting their shoulder, I hit their back because there was nothing I could have done to avoid that. They just gave me their back and I hit that. Well, that's their own damn fault. They turned, and they initiated by turning and exposing a new target zone. They now become the initiator of the block. Counter-blocking is held to the same standard as blocking. Now, we've talked about this a little bit. Counter-blocking is movement towards an incoming block to counter its force. So, jammer's coming up on a blocker. Jammer's going to lay a pretty good hit to get that blocker out of their way. And what does the blocker do? The blocker sees jammer coming and starts moving right back at the jammer. So their force is going to negate each other. It's going to be a pretty good hit, but their force, hopefully that blocker is not going to go flying because they're applying some of the force now instead of taking it all. Well, that's a counter block because they're moving towards that person. Just bracing yourself for a hit is not a counter block. Turning to present a new zone, that's a counter block. Moving towards the jammer, that's a counter block. Counter-blocking is held to the same standards as blocking. The exception being that blocking while out of play, in other words, outside of the engagement zone or during a no-pack situation. Blocking is illegal, counter-blocking is legal. Now a few definitions. Relative position. Relative position is a skater's location on the track in relation to other skaters when that skater is inbounds and upright, meaning a downed skater is not considered to have much in the way of relative position. Out-of-bounds skaters, same thing. They don't own a position on the track. If you want to own a position on the track, you got to be upright. So relative position could be this. You got a wall of 4 blockers all standing side by side. Well, your relative position is you're even with the blockers. So if there's a jammer behind you, you have a superior position because you are ahead of that jammer. So if your jammer engages an illegal block and gets ahead of you, your jammer has gained relative position. Relative to you, that jammer gained position. Similarly, if you initiate a block ahead of somebody ahead of you, causing them to, say, fall down, you have cost them their position on the track. You have gained relative position. Relative position can be thought in some ways to be a zero-sum game. If someone gains it, someone else loses it. Relative position is also judged by the position of everyone involved in an engagement, not just those who make contact. So those 4 blockers standing side by side, if the jammer goes and engages one on the very, very, very end and, causes, let's say it's a forearm penalty. They push them out of the way with a forearm and they go past them. Well, that jammer has just gained not just relative position on the person they hit, but on all those blockers in the wall there. They've gained position on them all. Next, advantage. Advantage is an event that benefits one skater or team over another. For example, scoring a point, gaining relative position, causing an opponent to lose relative position, impeding the progress of an opponent, rendering an opponent unable to block, for example, by destroying the pack, stopping the game clock. There's any number of these things. Interrupting a star pass. Anything that could be seen to give an advantage. And advantage is sometimes a little nebulous, so you want to be careful that you're not saying, well, in hypothetical theory, this could have resulted. Let's be a little more concrete than that. We want to know what was the actual advantage gained. Mind you, it may not be their strategic interest in the long run to stop the game clock, but that doesn't matter. If their illegal action stopped the game clock, we consider that an advantage in the short term. Established position. A skater's physical location and status on the track. For example, up versus down, in versus out of bounds, in play versus out of play, legal starting position versus illegal starting position. Those would all be examples of statuses on the track. It also includes their physical location. So, for example, a skater is standing in the middle of the pack. They're just standing there. They own the space they're standing on. That is their established position right there, that specific spot. A skater, of course, need not be standing still if they're skating along. Let's say the whole pack is moving and they're skating right in the middle. They're owning, again, they're kind of owning the spot that they're sort of in. When a skater changes their trajectory, that skater in the pack suddenly veers to the right, even though they're passing through territory on their new trajectory, they're not immediately establishing a new position. It takes another moment to do that. Here's an example. A skater who's out of bounds wants to re-enter the track. Before they can initiate a block when they get on the track, they have to establish a position. So that skater out of bounds has to step into bounds, stop for a heartbeat. Well, not stop, but I mean, like, not initiate that block for a heartbeat. Basically, take a moment to just establish a position, then they can initiate a block. They cannot just suddenly come racing right in from out of bounds and nail somebody because they have not established a position on the track. That skater, even though they were technically in bounds at the moment of that contact, it's actually an out of bounds block because that block was initiated starting from out of bounds. They were coming right in there. Had they gone onto the track and gone in a straight line for a moment, then changed trajectories to aim at their target and gone, that's fine because they were not on an initial trajectory towards that target. That extra moment that they spent of their going in a straight line allowed them to gain established position. Now, fouling out. Fouling out is the removal of a skater for the remainder of a game after accumulating 7 penalties. That's our limit. On your 7th penalty, you have a skater has given up their right to play for the remainder of the game. And by the way, penalties do not stop at 7. Skaters can get 8, they can get 9, they can get 10. Just because the skater's fouled out and they're on their way to the box doesn't mean they're not taking out their mouth guards, swearing at the referees, throwing their helmet on the ground, initiating a block on a skater coming out of the penalty box, whatever. Again, fouling out occurs at 7, but the skater can continue accruing penalties till they are gone. Blocking zone. We've talked about this in prior editions. Blocking zone is the part of a skater's body that initiates a block. It can be legal or it can be illegal. Target zone. The part of the targeted skate's body that receives the block. Again, can be legal or illegal. Immediately. Immediately is defined at the first legal opportunity. So, first, it has to be a legal opportunity. If a skater cannot engage into an action, for example, a skater's caught in the middle of a crowd of skaters, and they have stopped, and they're preventing the person behind them from moving forward, but they don't have the opportunity to not stop block this person. They can't continue movement. There's just a crowd of stop skaters all around. They're stuck. They do not have the opportunity. Similarly, even if there was an opposing skater in front of them and they can't move forward or cease their block, as this opposing skater is kind of pushing up against them with their back, they're not required to back block that person and kind of forcibly push them out of the way. Because while they might have had the opportunity to do so, it is not a legal opportunity to do so. There are many cases in here where skaters are required to do something immediately, but they are denied the opportunity to do so, or they are only given an illegal opportunity to do so. In that case, the skater does not have a legal opportunity, therefore we're not going to penalize them yet. We're going to continue waiting, and we're going to wait and see once the skater has the opportunity to do something, will they take it? And that's what will decide whether the skater gets the penalty or not. And finally, a warning. A warning is a verbal and sometimes physical indicator that an individual or team is in danger of receiving a penalty for an illegal action. Warning could be something as simple as, no pack! That's basically telling the skaters that there is no pack, and we now expect them to, all blockers rather, there's no pack, and we expect them to immediately attempt to reform the pack. Failing to do so, and we will start initiating penalties. That concludes Lesson 17, Introduction to Penalties. It was a pretty simple lesson over here. I'm basically getting you set up on just, again, some more basic concepts on what penalties are and what we're going to do with them. Next time we're going to be back in Lesson 18 with the 3 types of penalties, and for the first time I will be teaching what the actual penalties in the game are. All right, see you next lesson.